year 2023 is going to be a year of transition, political transition. And that also poses its own challenges for the economy at large. What are the prospects for the Nigerian economy in 2023 and beyond? That's what we're going to be discussing today. Given that a number of course, bodies have profiled their own ideas about what will happen. The IMF and World Bank has projected maybe a growth rate of 3.2% or thereabouts, whereas the Nigerian government hopes to do better than that. Where are we going to land, and what will be the momentous events that will shape 2023 for us economically? These are what we're going to be discussing today, and with us is an erudite economist and a very familiar face in the media, Professor Uche Waleke. Welcome, Prof.
Thanks so much, Dr. Tope.
Thank you
It's
so
indeed
much.
my pleasure to be on your program.
Oh, thank you. First time on this program,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we're highly honored that you have made time out for us. Now, I mean, you heard the little discussion I had, but that's just to give you a lot more time to speak about what the issues are. As an economist who has his hands on the fingers on the pulse of the economy of this country, which way Nigeria 2023 and beyond?
Well, I would like to start by saying I'm optimistic that 2023 is likely to pan out better than what we had in 2021. 2021, Tope, you recall, is ending, coming in at about 3% GDP growth rate. The last we have is 2.25%. But if you take it on the average, we've done like about 3%, so far.
Oh, yeah.
The government thinks that by 2020, before the end of 2023, we should be able to do an average of 3.75% in the budget, as according to the budget. But I think that's a little ambitious. If you look at projections we have seen so far, the IMF is projecting 3%. Initially it was 3.2. Yes, they revised it downwards to 3%. Interestingly, the Central Bank of Nigeria, in the last MPC, is projecting a GDP growth rate of 2.88%.
Wow.
Yes. That's
what could be their reason for that?
Yes, that's the CBN. Of course, if you look at the opening statements in that MPC communique, talked about global headwinds. They also think the Russia-Ukraine war impacts, will linger. They also think that central banks will continue develop, economies will continue to tighten monetary policy, and the Central Bank of Nigeria too has also said, if we go by the body language of the governor and if you read between the lines in that communique, it does appear that tightening will also continue in 2023.
Interest rate increases.
That's what it means.
So, but I wanted to quickly interject that, is it not possible for us to dislink this economy, being a developing economy, still on the frontiers, if you ask me, from, tying it so closely to global headwinds, Russia-Ukraine war, U.S. economy mopping up by increasing interest rates, thereby depriving us of foreign reserves.
Yes.
Of foreign investment.
Yes.
Are we saying that there's no wiggle room for us on our own to actually ginger ourselves up and get something done?
Oh, yes. That ordinarily should, have been possible. But unfortunately, we are still tied to the apron strings of, these economies. You take the U.S., for example. Anytime there is this policy tightening, anytime you have interest rates going up, what happens? Yields go up in the U.S., and that also affects even our exposure.
Yes.
We have taken a lot of Euro bonds, so it also impacts.
Are they variable rates?
Oh yes,
kind of.
They are. They are tied to. Yes, they are tied to the interest rates movement also in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah, Eurobonds are not offered in dollars. So
they're not
anytime
fixed rates.
They are not fixed rates. Yes, they are variable.
Oh my.
And the more the rates go up, the yields go up. Of course, that means usually you find the prices going down. So that's one aspect. The other aspect too has to do with the fact that we trade with the U.S. we import a number of items from the US. One way to, if you like, to use your words, if we must link ourselves from the US, it means we have to focus more on producing, domestically. Those things we used to buy from the US, we find a way of, getting them here. For example, in terms of wheat imports, I hope you know the US is our major supplier of wheat, not Ukraine.
Not Ukraine and Russia. Okay.
Exactly. And then even in terms of capital importation, if you look at capital importation with respect to source, there are two major countries, the US and the UK. So the bulk of our capital importation comes from these two economies. And anytime they are having challenges, you also find that that's also reflecting in the quantum of importations that we have. If you check the MBS reports on capital importation reports, you will find that it is declining because of the challenges that the UK and the US economies are facing since the Russian-Ukraine war. So to that extent, our economy is tied to that, and of course that also impacts the exchange rate.
Exactly. That's a major
Nigeria has
issue.
also taken some money from multilateral bodies, including the one we are owing IMF. So there is an extent to which you can't actually say you want to be on your own because of these linkages. That is a fact. But maybe one thing I also want you to maybe I should be asking you now. There's something that beats me. Why is it that we have an economy where you have the federal government making a projection of GDP growth at 3.75%, and the central bank, within the same economy, saying that they expect it to grow at 2.8%. So you can see that margin. So what it means is that the growth rate we expect to have in 2023 will still be weak.
Exactly.
Minding
the fact that our population growth rate is about 3%.
Yes, it's about 2.6 before now, inching up to 3%.
Yes,
and as long as we have...
And then I've always tried to do it properly, to say that whatever growth rate you are projecting, you should also discount inflation, for example.
No, but those growth rates are real GDP growth rates. I think they have taken into consideration inflation, which is also why, if you look at the projections, the IMF, for example, says the economy is likely to grow by 3%, and then is projecting inflation rate at 19% for 2023, while in our budget we are projecting inflation rate at 17.16%. Okay, much lower than that of the IMF. But of course, it's still high if you take into cognizance the fact that the CBN band is within 6 to 9%, and 17.16%, even if we're able to, inflation is able to come in at that rate, is still on the high side. So all of this will impact, what happens in 2023 going forward. But of course, Tope, that for me, the Gordian knot that needs to be untied by the incoming administration, has to do with these two things. One, what happens to the fuel subsidy, and two, the issue of multiple exchange rates.
Exactly.
Okay, these two, I call them Gordian knots. And interestingly, all the presidential candidates, the leading ones, are saying they would do it with them.
So is it going to be easy for them to just yank off subsidy?
That is the challenge. That is the challenge. The budget we have done for 2023, you said it's a transition year. Okay, the major risk it faces is that political risks. Who implements it? It's not going to be implemented by the present regime. No. Okay, as a matter of once the elections are over, we know the president. All attention shifts to the new administration. You expect the new government to set up a transition committee and so on. So attention moves to them. You now find that it is not this administration that will implement the 2023 budget. So it's a new administration, and implementing that budget is based on the a major condition that subsidy will go by the end of June, because they've only provided 3.36 trillion for subsidy, which is just from January to June. So that's where the problem is. If the new person is unable to take it off immediately, it means we should be ready to also have, a bigger budget deficit for 20.
Exactly, because we're projecting a deficit of about almost 11 trillion. Okay.
Yes, 11 trillion. And you're financing that largely, via borrowing.
Via borrowing, yes. And they mentioned a lot of local borrowing.
Local borrowing 7 trillion.
Yeah.
Also foreign borrowing. Then you also, very little is coming in from privatization process.
Yes.
And so on. So our fiscal state is really.
Don't you think there's wiggle room for increasing our revenue? Because I was just going through the recent FRS statement. They managed to collect 10.1 trillion, yes. Which is last year they did 6.4 trillion. Yes. So we're talking of about 40% increase or so, yes. Over what they did last year, which is quite remarkable.
Yes.
And of course, the chairman of FRS still complained about some of the challenges they faced, including that some other agencies within the same federal government, yes. Would take them to court, yes. From time to time.
Yes,
and in going to court, both of them will lose the money they're supposed to get, yes, from.
Absolutely.
And that they could have done a lot better. Yes. This is very interesting, yeah. So, can't we, what kind of sense of urgency should we have on the revenue side to help ourselves on this fiscal issue? But I want to believe there's money in this country.
Oh, there is.
However, we're just not being very serious about this.
Oh, there is. The FIRS says it hopes to do 12 trillion by
in the new year,
2023, from 10.1 trillion that it's recorded. Now, I think that the revenue side is likely to experience some improvement in 2023. Particularly having listened to some of these leading candidates, and none of them is talking about, or they are all talking about, ramping up IGR. They are also not saying they are going to rely more on borrowing. So if you look at the revenue prospects, the first thing to note is that the moment you unify exchange rates, and the exchange rates, you have an equilibrium that is closer to the parallel market rate than the official rate. You should expect that government revenue in naira terms, in absolute terms, will rise.
Will rise.
Yes, it of course.
So basically, you're proposing devaluation.
That's what it is now. Once you unify rates, you have automatically said that.
And so, but there's a risk there as well, if I may ask, yes. Because. And the experience has been that I think in 2016 they did that by moving rates from about 199 to 360.
It doesn't have an end.
And then this other one runs away as well. So are you sure the same thing will not happen?
No, I think what we're saying is let there be one window. When I say parallel market rates, I'm looking at a rate that is not official. I'm saying within the official rates, okay? Of course, you have several windows. You have the official one, you have interbank, you have the I&E window. If you can have one single rate, that tends towards the equilibrium,
yes.
And of course, that equilibrium price, you can be sure that it will be closer. You have this convergence. The parallel market premium will reduce. That's the point I'm making. Of course, it will. Bring about devaluation. I'm saying the flip side of devaluation is that the 3 tiers of government will have more money to share.
Yeah.
Okay. And there is also the likelihood that in terms of non-oil revenue, the performance will be a lot better, particularly if they implement some of the things they have put in the Finance Act.
Yes.
Okay. So if we have an improvement there, you should also expect that this issue of debt service to revenue may also, not be too much of a problem. So the point I'm making is that 2023 is likely to turn out a lot better. Again, let me put it this way: all other factors, remain
equal. Yes, exactly. Like you economists say, even though all other factors will never be equal. Well, it's a ceteris paribus.
Yes.
So yes, this is a very interesting trajectory. You give us some hope, but we're going to take a short break now, and then we'll come back to continue the discussion with Professor Uche Waleke. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the show, and we're still discussing the prospects for the Nigerian economy for 2023 and beyond. And with me is Professor Uche Uwaleke, world-renowned and Nigeria's first professor of capital markets. Welcome, Prof. Before we went on break, we were brainstorming about some of these issues facing the Nigerian economy, and looking at what we should be looking forward to in this year as we transition into a different government and beyond. What are your thoughts? We know what the issues are. Inflation at 21.34%, a burgeoning debt crisis, if you call it that. Our debt now, by the time you add the ways and means, we could be looking at about $150 billion. The finance ministers would always like to compare that with our GDP, but I think it's not a particularly useful construct, if you ask me. We still have employment at where it's at. What are your thoughts, and what should the present government still do, if it was possible, within the ambit of the time that they have? And what should the next government do, whoever it is that becomes president?
Let me even start with the fiscal challenge, the huge fiscal imbalance, the debt issue. You just mentioned it, that it's not about debt to GDP.
Yeah.
Your debt to GDP, can be below 30%, below, which of course is below international threshold, exactly. 55%.
Yeah.
But what is more important is the debt service to revenue ratio, which is also why I think that going forward, the real metric, the real indicator for debt burden in Nigeria should be on this debt service to revenue, and not just debt to to GDP, because it's your capacity to pay.
Exactly,
that really matters. So it's a major challenge. Now you're looking at 44.2 trillion, the one captured by the DMO, and then on the just mentioned the ways and means, around nearly 23 trillion. And by the time you add the two, you're looking at something over 70 trillion. Now, what can be done immediately? There has been this suggestion about securitization.
Oh yes,
that's the central bank should be allowed to securitize those debts. What that means is that offer securities in their place so that investors can take them up, and then that will help the balance sheet of the central bank immediately. But the burden will also be on the government to now pay over a 40-year period at 9%. So that has been suggested as a way out. But I also think, although this is very highly contentious, maybe I will also want to pick your thoughts on that. Is it possible for the central bank to write off this debt? That's what I'm saying, it's contentious.
That's very contentious.
Yes, because this, remember, ways and means is just about the central bank printing money.
Yeah.
Central bank printing money and lending to the government. Of course, we know the law says, CBN Act says, whatever you're doing should be seen as an overdraft. It shouldn't be more than 5% of the government's actual revenue for the previous year. But for some reasons, this was breached over time, and now we have this size of debt with us. So can it be written off? Because I say this because the negative impact of that on the economy must have happened. Because when you print money and lend to the government, and government uses it to finance deficits, part of that goes to consumption. That must have, of course, that will fuel inflation.
Yes.
So inflation rate is where it is today, partly on account of those ways and means, that also increasing money supply in the economy. So the impact has happened. So we are talking about a sunk, what we say in finance.
Sunk cost.
Yes, already a sunk cost. So if that is, if the central bank writes it off now, that will now remove about 1.8 trillion, in debt service for the federal government. Although the central bank will bear it and the balance sheet will, have, but that is the central bank. Central bank is in a stronger position to absorb it, than the government. So that's, you asked, what is there anything that can be done before the next administration comes on board?
That's serious.
So
but
apart from
it's a very nice
securitization,
suggestion, but
yes,
very tough
yes,
call.
Yes, it is.
And
but
will
I
it
also
not be seen
noticed
as
that
a government default?
No, if
Even
central,
whereas
if central
it's not
bank
a
is
bond, but these
yes.
ways and means is also. It's
Yes.
like you're giving someone, you have to have defaulted before the bank will write off your loan.
But you're defaulting to your bank.
Exactly.
The central bank
and the
is
same
the
problem
central,
with this
yes.
with the securitization suggestion,
Yes.
because when they mute that suggestion, my thinking is, how do you sell it to investors that a federal government borrowed money in excess and then you're having to repackage? Because securitization has to do with repackaging
that's what it
into some sort of instrument to sell to investors. Now, will it fly with foreign investors? Would they want? Because the federal government exposure to federal government is meant to be the guilt.
Yes.
Meant to be the best exposure anybody can have in any economy.
Risk-free.
Yes.
Risk-free.
And however, this risk-free exposure is now carrying a risk.
A risk of default risk.
Exactly. So
yes. No, it's not to the extent that.
But I think that your second suggestion, as a bit outlandish, I'm sorry to say, as it may sound, is worthy of consideration.
Yes, worthy of consideration, because if you notice last year, that was one of the debates I followed with respect to the European. I think it was the Bank of England, whether the Bank of England should also write off, government debts, because of course, over there. When the government issues bonds, the central banks also take those bonds. So if the central bank has lent money to the government, central bank is the banker to the government. It's also lender of last resort. Exactly. So it's in a position to write up, particularly where the argument has been made that part of why this overshot was done was because of COVID and because of economic recession. So could that not also provide justification, for writing it off?
You're very correct.
Yes, the CBN Act
because I think what you have said now is very worthy of consideration, and I hope that listeners at home will also take note of it, including those in government.
Yes.
Because I think if you look at the trajectory of the ways and means, for example, it really went up in 2020, 2021.
Yes.
Okay.
COVID,
everybody was shut down in their homes. Government had to give money to people.
Exactly.
Of course, there'll be shortages here and there, corruption here and there, but there was a time when governments around the world, including Nigeria, had to be going around just giving people money.
Yes.
So I think from what I've learned from what you have said now, is that we need to go and look at how developed economies have managed such crises in the past, because they would have had a similar crisis.
Yes.
The difference is in the packaging. Like for example, the UK that you mentioned. So how have they managed COVID spending?
Yes.
Where are those monies sitting? Those deficits, COVID deficits, because even till now, they're still paying people for sitting at home.
Oh, yes.
United States as well, where is the money sitting and how would they? Because many times we now practice not only economics, but even our governance without benefit of history. And we tend to behave as if everything starts and ends in Nigeria, and we say, oh, this is too outrageous. Yes. Perhaps we should learn and then now begin to seek the elite consensus and the in general consensus, including political consensus, necessary for walking through this very difficult moment. It's a very, very, and I'm going to also
very, and you can say, if assuming that is wrapped up before the new person comes in, that will be a lot of relief, because as I said, part of this 6.3 trillion naira provision for debt service is also includes the one for servicing ways and means. So
we're not even talking about even freezing that interest in the first place, for example.
Yes.
If a loan was going bad, a commercial loan, at a point you have to freeze interest. Perhaps the central bank should look at its own prudential guidelines and what have you, or how they would have a bank manage this particular situation. To say
in Ghana, that was the situation in Ghana recently. I don't know whether you read it. In Ghana, what have they done in Ghana? The government is also saying, especially to institutional investors, those who have bought their bonds, please, let us freeze the interest. That's what has happened in Ghana.
I'm aware of that.
Yes, they're saying, if for retail investors, well, there's nothing, but for institutional investors, those who have taken, huge, made investments in our bonds, that the interest elements, will be frozen. So that's part of what they're doing in Ghana to be able to manage also their debt, situation.
In this instance, this is to our own selves.
Exactly.
From our own bank of last resort.
Exactly.
The bankers to the government.
Exactly.
So it's an in-house thing.
It's an
Probably should be treated as such. And people should understand that COVID is also a once-in-a-lifetime thing.
Exactly.
Because let me say that there's never been a time when something like COVID happened where the world economy was shut down. In 1918, 1920, when the Spanish flu came, the world wasn't shut down. Exactly. Neither was the world as integrated as it is today. World economy. Imagine 2020, everybody was raring to go. Businesses were connected all over the world, and then people had to sit at home for 6 months, almost 1 year.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented.
Yes.
So I think our analysis should also, because a lot of people just fly into a rage. Oh, Emefiele did this, CBN did that. I think the issues have a lot more complicated than that.
Exactly.
What would we have done? When nobody was able to collect taxes, are we going to be owing our soldiers and policemen?
I remember the economy was also in recession in 2020.
Exactly.
How come we came out of it very quickly?
Very quickly. It was
because of the intervention.
This intervention, ways and means,
exactly.
that the government used to pay salaries. And imagine now if we were owing soldiers 24 months salary.
You will complicate a lot of things.
You know what I'm saying? You are finished because but you'd have mutiny on your hands or whatever else, or policemen being owed for 48 months. So I think there's a need for our analysis to be fair in this regard.
Absolutely.
Yes. As we round up, what would be your advice for businesses, for households, how to manage some of the shocks that may come, or how do they position themselves for the growth that we're expecting as well?
Well, the environment is, we often describe it as a VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. When you have a VUCA environment, the best advice one would give is to also look inwards and see how you can, cut costs. Yes, inflation rate is rising, and in this kind of environment, your best bet will be to also, come back and see how you can cut costs, whether at the level of firms or at the level of individuals, or even at the level of government. We should be able to see how we can reduce waste, how we can also, cut costs, and also take advantage of any investment, opportunity out there. And the good thing is that our markets are still, quite resilient, particularly the, financial markets, whether it's the money market or capital market. The opportunities are also still there for people to invest. And such investment, in my view, should also be, have a long-term perspective. Not the case of you want to invest today, tomorrow, you get your returns. But generally, I told you, I am optimistic that 2023 is going to be a better year for the country. Well,
it's been great speaking with you, Professor Waleke. But like I said earlier on, this is just the first in a series of discussions I hope to have with you. It's always a pleasure listening to you and learning a lot from you. And I hope that you'll be around to advise the next government in Nigeria. Because they need the brains of people.
You'll also be around. Thank you.
So it's been a great one speaking about 2023 and beyond on the economic front with Professor Waleke. Thanks for joining us today, and see you next week.